Hello and welcome again. We'll try to connect shortly with Andrew Stroehlein, who is the European Media Director at Human Rights Watch, a notorious communicator in the field of human rights and beyond. We're trying now to see if we can connect in this live, and we're going to talk about who he is, his work, and the hottest topics nowadays within this field, especially the field of press freedom and fake news. Even yesterday we had a very interesting case, the Marchenko case, where the death of a journalist was faked, some say to protect his life, but others argue that it was an inappropriate way to spread fake news over a very sensitive topic. Now we're going to see if we can connect. I'm going to try to call him right now. Let me see. So I would like to say hi to Luca and Matteo, who are watching this right now. Hey Andrew, that's great. I'm going to try and connect you right now. Andrew, do you see the possibility, maybe you can comment that, you can see the possibility to join this live? I currently don't see you in my list of viewers. Actually, this is pretty good because the audience usually on Facebook Live builds up after the third minute. So it's actually a positive coincidence. Let me see again. Okay, so I'm now chatting with Andrew. I see you're posting comments. I'm afraid I don't know why I don't see you in the list of viewers. Hi Tromeur, nice to see you. I'm trying to connect with Andrew Stroehlein here. Thank you for being with us. There you go. We'll be connecting in a few seconds. I can see the connection is being added to this Facebook Live, so we'll be together shortly. Hi.
Hey, how you doing? There we are. Finally got that sorted out.
It's a real pleasure to have you with me, really. Where are you right now?
I'm at home, actually. I'm working from home today, so I'm home in Brussels.
In Brussels. So,
Yep.
and funny enough, I'm in Strasbourg.
Great.
So I'm literally, I'm getting out of the plenary feeling. People are leaving by the thousands, going to the bus, going to the train, and heading back, some to Brussels and many of them to their member states. Andrew, can you give us a bit of an introduction of who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, I'm the European Media Director for Human Rights Watch, and I work here in Brussels. That means that I oversee a lot of the media strategy and media outreach for Human Rights Watch. I'm a spokesperson for the organization. And because the organization is based in New York, and most of our staff are to the west of us, I end up commenting a lot on things before New York wakes up. So that means I'm spending a lot of time on European issues, a lot of time on issues that affect either the EU or individual member states or European states outside the EU, plus a little bit in West Africa, a little bit in the Middle East, a little bit in Central Asia, and so on.
What is the hottest topic nowadays in Europe when we talk about human rights and press freedom?
That's a pretty good question. It changes minute to minute, I think. But right now, the biggest issue is really what's happened in Ukraine over the last, 24 or 48 hours with this really incredible story. I've never really seen anything like it in 20 years of dealing with these sorts of issues. to have
Can you give
a
us a bit
journal.
of a sum up? Like,
Well, I mean,
unfortunately, it was not
it's a
very
pretty
much in the
straightforward.
business
I mean, the
because
story
it's a
itself
crazy
is,
story also to understand
yeah,
what happened.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
a really
I mean,
crazy
it
to
is a
understand what
crazy
happened.
story. So the story is kind of convoluted, but in a sense very straightforward. A journalist was reported murdered. There were photos of his murdered body, and the police reported him murdered. His friends, his family, were mourning, and then the next day, it turned out that he was actually alive. Um, Now, it's so problematic for so many reasons. I mean, well, so go back a step. So the police said this was, cooperation with the journalist to capture some criminals. But the problem is this is a place where journalists do actually get killed. Where there's in Ukraine and in Russia, journalists are being murdered, and this was a Russian journalist in Ukraine. So it was a completely plausible story. Plus, the authorities had said this had happened. Plus, the friends and the family, were all behaving because as if it had happened because they thought it had happened. I mean, he didn't even tell his family. It's so bizarre then for him to walk in the next day to a press conference and then say that to show that he's alive and then to try to come up with this crazy explanation with the police. It's really damaging for the very concept of truth that we're trying to kind of fight for every day as we're pushing against the propaganda machines in a lot of countries, not least, of course, Russia, which is pushing a lot of propaganda Ukraine's way and towards the European Union. Incredibly disturbing because now they can just say, "Oh, we can't trust anybody, can't trust the authorities. There's no real objective truth. It's just it's all what one country says or another." It's horrifically damaging.
And in your many years of experience, have you ever seen anything like that?
No,
Can you
nothing. I
recall?
mean, nothing that even comes close. I mean, many journalists have been killed. This is the first one that's come back to life.
You didn't have to wait 3 days in this case.
No, nothing like that. No.
Apart from this crazy story that just happened, and even in Strasbourg, there was a lot of talk about the issue because we were talking over the past couple of years a lot about fake news and protecting journalists at the same time. And why are we talking in the European Parliament extensively about the protection of journalists is also because of recent murders. One, Jan Kuciak and his partner in Slovakia, and the also tragic murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia. Do you witness actually in Europe a return to some darker past that we thought we had forgotten?
Well, I mean, to be honest, there's been a lot of pressures on journalists inside Europe for a number of years now. I think these two murders in particular have really woken people up to some extent. And we're still kind of really pushing for investigations that will be independent and free of political bias and be seen to be independent and free of political bias. I think we're moving a little bit more closely in that direction, or a little bit better in that direction, maybe in Slovakia than in Malta right now. But it's not just these horrific, very dramatic events of journalists being murdered, but also the real pressures that we're seeing on journalism all over the place. So we're seeing real pressure on journalists and on media houses in places like Hungary and in Poland, which have, by various methods, really gutted the independent media and are trying to gut it even further, so that the state media or media even independent media in the hands of the owners who are friendly to the ruling parties, that they're really creating and dominating the narrative that voters are engaging with. It's incredibly dangerous. I mean, just Poland alone, hundreds of journalists in the last couple of years have been either fired or have been kind of forced to resign or have been moved to positions that are no longer kind of frontline reporting positions. So they've taken a reporter from a reporting position to move them to the archive, where they're not able to get their message or their point of view across. So those kinds of pressures are maybe less visible or less dramatic, but they are probably have actually more impact in the countries where they're happening.
Well, you just mentioned two governments in particular, Hungary and Poland, that are under serious scrutiny by the European Union over the past couple of years. But do you think that European institutions actually have the power or a power to control what happens in terms of media freedom in any member state? Do you think there is actually a power that they can pursue to guarantee media freedom in their member states?
Well, I think in general, we're talking about values. And so in terms of actual mechanisms for, you use the word control. I think maybe the better word would be persuade. The European Union is not necessarily a set of institutions that pushes very strict control, but has a lot of influence in a lot of other ways. I mean, there are Article 7 values-based arguments that can be made, and those are being made right now in terms of so-called judicial reforms that are really a hijacking of the judiciary in Poland. But there are other things that can be done. I mean, for example, we're on a campaign right now with Human Rights Watch to see if the EPP, the European People's Party, will distance itself from one of its members and really expel one of its members, that is Fidesz, the ruling party of Hungary. Not just for what it's done to media, but also what it's done to NGOs. The laws that are coming in now to prohibit people from actually helping or providing any kind of support for refugees, for example. The pressure that's been put on the Soros organization, Open Society Foundations, and the Central European University. And not to mention the kind of hate campaigns that the Hungarian government has launched. Hate campaigns against George Soros, hate campaigns against the European Union, hate campaigns against refugees. It's been a real whirlwind of abusive noises and policies coming out of Budapest the last few years with Viktor Orban. And even if you don't look at the actual mechanisms that the EU institutions can put in place, there are pretty simple things that a body like or a group like the EPP could put on.
Nevertheless, the situation you just explained, this doesn't seem to damage the government. I mean, Orban just came out again of a landslide victory, so it seems like. Why then would governments that are trying to establish an illiberal democracy, as they call it, stop doing that, since they get more and more and more power, and their power doesn't seem to be undermined. So
Well, they've undermined they undermined a lot of parts of the vote, and of course, being able to control the media means that they will get a large share of the vote. But of course, getting a large share of the vote doesn't mean you're democratic. I mean, winning an election does not mean you're democratic. You can be popular and not democratic. Democracy is not simply voting once every 4 or once every 5 years, right? Democracy has with it an entire array of other aspects, respect for human rights being a key part. Just let me give you an example, right? So say there's 10 people sitting around a table, okay? And, they take a vote, and 8 of those people decide that they're going to kill one of the other people around the table, throw them out the window, okay? Now, it's democratic, right? It's the will of the people. You have 8 out of 10 people who want to commit this murder, so that's democratic, right? Well, no, actually, and we all know it's wrong. Why? We know it's wrong because fundamentally underneath that sort of the voting, that will of the people, is something greater, something bigger, something more important, which is our fundamental rights. In this case, it's right to life. So a person has a right to exist, a right to life that is more important than this so-called will of the people. And so we're seeing the undermining of rights on the basis of, well, it's the will of the people. It's what the people want. And I'm sorry, that's just not good enough. That's not democracy.
And what is the main mission of Human Rights Watch, not only Europe, but all around the world?
Sure. Well, what we aim to do is we aim to have governments uphold their obligations under international law in regards to human rights. So, we are looking at, for example, in conflict zones, international humanitarian law and the laws of war. And in other contexts, we're looking at fundamental rights like right to life, media freedom, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and so on. We're trying to make governments uphold their obligations. So our main targets, our main interlocutors are governments and government officials, pointing out the legal obligations that they have to uphold human rights in their jurisdictions.
And would you say that you're an activist as well? I mean, apart from your position, would you call yourself an activist?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think activist has a difficult ring to it. I mean, I don't feel that I'm on kind of the front lines like a lot of activists. I'm not on the barricades. I'm not shouting in the streets. But in a way, yes, I am an activist, and I think what I would see myself as is a supporter of activists. Somebody who is trying to do what he can to help activists, human rights activists, do their job in the places where they work. I mean, Human Rights Watch is an international organization, but we are working very closely with hundreds and hundreds of organizations around the world, smaller organizations, sometimes national organizations or sometimes local organizations that are really, they're feeding us input about the human rights situation in their communities, and we are trying to get international attention for that, or sometimes even just national government attention. Sometimes national governments won't pay attention to their own people until some loud voices from outside come in and draw attention to it, and help people out like that. So that's what we can do, and we can be the kind of to help empower those local activists to do their job better.
Andrew, you have quite a followership on Twitter. About 80,000 followers, which
Yeah. I'm not Donald Trump or Kim Kardashian, so don't get too excited.
You should be. You should be. I mean,
well,
these
numbers. Just tell everybody that. Tell everybody that.
I will. Okay, I agree. Maybe that this is not Kardashian's numbers, but in Brussels and everything which is related to EU affairs, that's probably the biggest followership I can see, apart from, let's say, big politicians. So. Apart from, brushing your ego a little bit and telling you that you're doing great work with your social media, what I wanted to ask you is, for your work, so raise awareness about human rights and press freedom, what is the best way and what is your experience in using social media, not just Twitter, or do you focus only on Twitter? How did you start? Sure. I think you were an early adopter of Twitter. I remember watching you.
Yeah, I guess about maybe 10 years. It's 10 years ago. So I think here
I would call that
I probably was.
adopter.
Yeah, probably. Yeah,
it was 2009.
Yeah,
I would call that an early adopter. And so, how did you realize already back in the day that okay, this is the way people will communicate more and more, and especially to communicate with journalists and to provide snappy information. As quick as possible, Twitter will be the way to go. So did you see that coming, and how did you develop the way you communicate over the past 10 years?
Sure. Well, it started actually when I was at the International Crisis Group, where I worked for 10 years. And one of our interns told me about this. So I was a communications director. An intern came along and said, "Oh, hey, have you heard about this new thing?" And of course, I was skeptical, and like everyone seemed to start off on Twitter very skeptical. But I just signed on and I started doing it. And I think maybe not exactly at the very beginning, but within a few months, I started to see how more and more journalists were on it. I mean, like Twitter is. It's never going to be as big as Facebook. It's never going to be as big as some of the other ones, but it has a kind of elite reach. I mean, it has a lot of other reaches. It does a lot of other things, and it has fulfills many roles and ambitions that people have. But for me, like you say, it's a way to reach journalists in ways that just you can't. So what happens now is a story breaks in reality, and then 30 seconds to 2 minutes later, it breaks on Twitter. And then everything that's going to be said about that story and everybody who's going to comment on it will appear on Twitter within the next 30 minutes, 45 minutes maybe. And after 45 minutes, everybody who's going to write a story about the breaking news aspect of that will have written their story about the breaking news aspect of that. And then the radio and the websites and whatnot will pick up these stories. And there'll be secondary effects, and then there'll be opinion pieces and commentary about the event and so on and so forth. But that's it. That's the kind of time you have. So if you're not kind of responding to news as it breaks, if you're not really in that mix, then you don't get seen. Because what journalists used to do in the old days is they would have a story, and then they would Google, who's an expert on some story would break in Ethiopia. Okay, the big story in Ethiopia, something's just happened. And who's the expert on Ethiopia? So they would go to Google in the old days and type in Google and figure out, okay, here we have an expert on Ethiopia. Now and for the last many years, they have been going to Twitter and just seeing who's talking about it. So story in Ethiopia breaks, finding information, plug in a couple searches into Twitter, figure out who's talking about it. Oh, there's a hashtag, follow that. And then, okay, now I see some experts. Here's a person from Oxfam talking about it. Here's a person from Amnesty International about it. Here's a government official talking about it. Boom, I have 3 sources. I have a nice little story. I can write that story now in 20, 30 minutes, and it's done. It's out, and I move on to the next story. And those kind of initial pieces about the news become kind of the baseline for all the reporting then that follows. So, it's being in on the ground floor of news as it breaks and being able to comment on things, intelligently as they happen.
Did you try any other platforms? Since you started, since that intern,
Oh yeah,
the one day back when you were at the ICG in Brussels, right? Was it always in Brussels?
Yeah, in Brussels.
Is it still in Avenue Louise?
Yep. Still based in Avenue Louise, as far as I know.
Great building. I think it's the Generali building.
The Generali building, yeah. We were on the
building.
we used to be on the top floor of that. It was a great view. Oh man, great view.
Great view. Yeah. I should come and visit sometime. So I can imagine to see. So because we're talking about disruptive communication and the way people adopt new technologies, and the feeling I have compared to the US is that in politics and institutions, Europe always waits a little bit longer. They always try to dip their feet first into the water, see how it feels, and then they adopt new technologies, always with a couple of years delay compared to our US counterparts. Apart from that, so that intern comes into the office and say, hey, I'd like to show you this new thing. It's called Twitter. Some people are using it now. I mean, the user basis at the time was definitely a few million because
I think I was 17 millionth and something,
there you go.
No.
And then you kind of figured out that it might pick up. So you played it with it a little bit. Your presence grew, but somewhere along the way, especially when Twitter started plateauing, because the user basis I think it stopped over the past few years, is about 350 million. It didn't grow, as you said, that much, and it will never grow as much as Facebook. But were you ever tempted to go to other platforms when you saw that, for instance, Facebook also started enlarging, extending their functions also to accommodate exactly the kind of work that you do? But Twitter, for our kind of work, always kept a special place. So now Facebook is even going back to their original business model, and they're trying to keep people that know each other together and give less space and diminishing the reach of companies. So pages are seeing.
Oh yeah, it's huge. So it's a huge impact.
But Twitter always kept that business model pretty much. They made a few adjustments with the highlights, with a few technical features. But compared to Facebook, who kind of went like this, so every 3 months there would be a major Facebook update, Twitter kept the business model and even, a few years ago, Jack Dorsey was criticized because he wouldn't innovate, but probably that business model and that authenticity kept them alive. And still to date, for what we do and for what you do, Twitter is the best way to communicate. Now, but were you ever tempted anyway to try other networks, whether this was Instagram, LinkedIn, or Snapchat, or Facebook,
Sure,
or
sure.
Reddit?
Yeah, I mean,
What
I've
was
tried.
your experience with that?
Well, honestly, I've tried everything. And the fact is that for the most part, Twitter is still where the journalists are. So for me, professionally, it's the most important. Facebook's probably second most important, but as you say, I mean, in terms of driving traffic to our website or any website, Facebook used to be hugely important. It used to be a major driver of people to our material, but it's simply not anymore. I mean, it's just they've changed the algorithm, and as you say, it's just taken a massive nosedive, and we can't generate any traffic off of Facebook these days. It's terrible. And so we're looking at a lot of other things, a lot of other options. I mean, I tried Snapchat. It's fun. I've tried LinkedIn. It doesn't, I don't feel that people go there for news in the way that they do for Twitter, certainly not breaking news. Other things, some of the messaging apps I think are very interesting and very useful. I'm a part of a number of WhatsApp groups that include journalists that are really interesting and useful. So, you have a WhatsApp group of journalists who are interested in issue X. And, you have a couple NGO people there like me adding some commentary or adding some expertise or just telling people where to go. Okay, we have an expert on this subject, get this person involved or contact them. Those kinds of groups can be very useful. But, sometimes Facebook groups can be useful as well.
Yes.
I have a colleague who runs a couple of Facebook groups dedicated to very specific subjects, and again, there's a lot of journalists in those and using those, and that's quite good. It takes a lot of effort to get it sorted out in the beginning and really get it launched. But they're working very well once they are up and running.
I think something that has been and will be even more a game changer is the introduction of stories.
Mm-hmm.
So on Instagram and on Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
Stories pretty much are, so let's talk about Facebook as a company, and then we're going to dive a bit more into the recent Zuckerberg hearing.
Yeah.
So Facebook as a company, which also owns Instagram and WhatsApp and Messenger, kind of stole the Snapchat model. So basically, they adapted to the way people consume information right now. Our attention span is getting lower, so media companies have also to adapt to our continuously lowering attention span. So creating stories that last about, let's say, 3, 5, 6, 10 seconds that disappear after 24 hours was actually a smart way to attract this lowering attention span. And this is how Snapchat came along first. Facebook via Instagram first adopted that model via stories, which they then rolled out to Facebook and WhatsApp. Now, within your field, what I think can be a game changer is the way journalists, especially war correspondents, use stories to describe what they see pretty much in a way that people can consume this information easily and then get attracted to this because they are, on one way, peeking into somebody's life. I'm not reading a statement. I'm actually seeing what this person sees. I'm actually in Gaza right now during the 70th anniversary of the declaration of the State of Israel. I'm actually in Ukraine. I'm actually in Slovakia during the investigation, and I'm meeting people. So I'm documenting in a way that is appealing to people. So this, I think, can be a game changer, especially for journalists that want to show a deeper side of investigations and even a deeper side of what they see as the truth against fake news. Because while watching stories, you are basically wearing somebody's clothes. You are there. you embody exactly
exactly
what they see.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, Facebook Live started doing that at the beginning. But as it happens with a lot of Facebook features, they have a peak, then they fade out.
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
now Facebook Live are usually successful if they are of great quality. What do I mean? People are attracted to Facebook Live if it comes from a professional camera, not anymore from a phone. So if you can see, for instance, how the European Commission or the big institutions work, they now launch Facebook Live only from cameras. So now the users are getting used to this, and they get bored of the Facebook Live launch like
Exactly.
this,
Yeah. Yep.
which just 6 months ago was the best product they
Yeah.
they were promoting.
Yeah, because
So
it's too slick is what happens. Like it becomes too slick, and then
exactly.
and people get turned off because it looks like, it just looks too professional.
But anyway, what I wanted to raise with this is that even though you have a platform which will be your core communicating platform, I think that people in our business always need to keep up to date with changing technology, because you were an early adopter on Twitter 10 years ago, but we cannot predict what will be the next platform. And if we lag behind, if we are late in adapting to these new technologies, we also lose out on the audience we want to address.
No, it's very true. No, it's very true. And it's very difficult to know, and you have to kind of build experimentation into your schedule, into your work schedule. You can't say, so my kind of experimenting time is Friday afternoon, and I say, oh yeah, I'm going to look at something new. I'm going to read the articles on new ideas, new platforms, new ways of using old platforms. And I think a lot of people don't do that. I mean, journalists are very busy. Everybody's very busy, and you're running around from one, and you don't necessarily you're not really trying to look ahead or predict the next thing. So it's quite difficult. But one thing you're mentioning with journalists using these stories to show what they're doing in the field, we've been playing around with that as well. Some of our researchers in the field at Human Rights Watch have been doing that. Others like Amnesty International and other groups have been doing that as well. I mean, it's a little bit easier for us, though, because I think it's difficult for big media companies to know how they're going to monetize that. I mean, they can get viewers for the person in the ground, particularly in a very dramatic situation, a big protest or a conflict or something. Then they can do that, with security concerns, being important as well. But how does the company, which is a business, monetize that? And they're still trying to figure that out.
You know what? I was at the Corriere della Sera last week in Milan, and we exactly discussed in an informal meeting about this very topic, because newspapers are very much challenged by the way now information is produced by everybody.
Remember, there's plants coming out of my head. Sorry, I just realized there's plants coming out of my head.
That's a great flower.
I know, that's all right, but it's coming out of my head, so I'm going to take it. That's better.
This is the fun thing of Facebook Live. And basically, they were exactly discussing how they can keep their business model sustainable. And pretty much, so, in this page, I'd like to also talk about technology. What they do is, they go, actually, I want to try and see if I can do it live. So if you go on the Instagram account of Il Corriere, they have stories, but, okay, so this is the page of
I'm having a look too.
Okay? So they roughly have, they have 90,000 followers, which is, it's very good for a newspaper. But if you click here on the stories button, you will see the home page and so on, but you will see also an arrow. And if you swipe up, it will take you to the article. So usually on Instagram, if you post a photo, you cannot add a link, but you can do it via stories.
Right. Yes, exactly.
So
yes.
they adapted to this, and basically, users now are getting lazy. So you don't want to drive users away from the platform. So with this technique, you swipe up, you stay within Instagram, and you're reading the article there. So you don't have to open a browser and move away from all the things you were watching on Instagram before. You can see it straight away there. And then basically the user wants to have the opportunity to, in case they don't like the article, to just quickly go back and keep watching the stories. So what I would recommend as a passionate communicator in politics and beyond is that everybody who has an interest in keeping up to date, apart from following your advice, which is find a space for personal development. For you was Friday afternoon, for somebody else can be whenever they're away from their kids or from their work.
Yeah.
But the easiest thing, and I think the most underestimated activity to do, is to find partnerships with the companies. So companies like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn are hardly reached out, are hardly, let's say, contacted by institutions, but actually they have a great interest in telling, hey, you work for a member of parliament or you work for an organization, I am Twitter, I'm going to tell you how to maximize the features that we offer in our platform. And in my experience, this is where I got the most benefits in all my previous jobs. Going straight to the company, contacting them and say, hey, we have an interest in using your platform, what do you recommend? What do you think is your experience in this? Do you think is there isn't an attitude in Europe or in journalists or by journalists or organizations to do that? Do you think there is a bit of, what is your experience?
I think so. I think we're all doing that to some extent. And media houses have been doing that more and more. And certainly NGOs with big media profiles like ours are doing that. You know, just sitting down with people from these companies saying, well, like what actually works? You know, what are you seeing? What do you think will work? And sometimes they don't have the best advice because they don't understand exactly what they're what we're trying to do. But a lot of times they have new ideas or show us features we didn't even really understand. And you know, that's one of the things that really never ceases to amaze me. Like even after all this time on Twitter and everything, you know, you call me an early adopter. I don't know if 17 millionth in line is exactly an early adopter, but let's say I'm an early adopter. And there's still stuff about Twitter that I see and like, oh, I didn't realize that. I didn't know that. I didn't know you could do that. And I'm learning stuff all the time. And you know, it comes from other users, but sometimes it is like from my meetings with people from Twitter, and or you know, my other colleagues have meetings as well with people from the company, and they're just sitting down, and going through stuff, and letting them show you some of the way. I think it's great for the companies as well. Obviously, I mean, they're trying to ultimately somewhere down the line sell a product, and if people are using it better and more, then that's good for them too.
Andrew, where are you traveling next?
Off to New York tomorrow. So
anything big or?
No, just small meetings, just small stuff. Nothing grand this time.
And apart from the cases, one last question. Apart from the cases we mentioned earlier on, what other countries or specific situations within the protection of journalists and the guarantee of media freedom should we be looking at in Europe and beyond? Do you see anything that hasn't exploded yet which could constitute a danger for media freedom in the near future?
Well, I think a lot of the risks and the problem areas are known. A lot of the problem countries are known, and they've been looked at a lot over the last few years by many good organizations. I mean, if you think about the CPJ and RSF and Human Rights Watch and Amnesty and other half a dozen other great organizations that are looking at media freedom and looking at some of these issues, we're all concerned with a lot of the same places. We're all concerned with Turkey, the #1 jailer of journalists in the world. We're all concerned with censorship in China. We're all concerned with crackdown on media freedom in places like Russia. We're all concerned about this crazy new case in Ukraine, and we're concerned with the kind of this slow drip by drip crackdown on the media that's happening in Hungary, and even a bit faster in some ways in Poland. And you know, I think we're also seeing pressure on the media in the United States in a huge way. I mean, there's hardly a day goes
Course.
hardly a day goes by right now when President Trump isn't blasting the media and attacking the
Is that
media
changing a little bit? You know, I
and
was
call him.
involved.
No, I mean, he's
Yeah.
still, it's like a tweet a day or a tweet every other day calling calling out the media on this, that, and the other thing. He's called them enemies of the people. It's kind of really horrific, authoritarian style language. I mean, he's an authoritarian wannabe, and
So you
this is the
confirm
way
that
he
that
rolls.
hasn't toned down. I mean, I was
No,
in
I don't think
DC
it's
right
toned down at
after the
all. No,
election,
no,
and the
no, no. I don't
mood
think it's a
was terrible, and
no, no.
journalists really felt that they were taking away their freedom.
Yeah,
And
well, yeah, I'm not sure about. I mean, journalists are. There's still a lot of journalists still doing a very good job, and the one the one side of American journalism or media that is really problematic is this kind of access journalism, and we saw that in relation to the White House Correspondents' Dinner and some of the some of the not
yeah,
some of the media companies and media officials kind of even some journalists kind of responding to the comedy routine this address that was given in ways that really suggested that this kind of instant deference to the president and the presidency. Journalists stand up when the president enters the room. I mean, it's kind of strange to a lot of people in other parts of the world. Um, it's it's always kind of been there, and so the potential for it to be abused by someone is great. But in large part, a lot of American journalists are just doing their job and calling the president out on his many lies and pointing out the many criticisms of his policies or attempts at policies, and just doing their job. And Trump is calling them enemies of the people, and other politicians who are seeing that are taking up those kinds of words and using them as well, and it's kind of spreading. It's a, there's it's a really dangerous kind of rhetoric, right? Because you have that sort of rhetoric, you have that kind of environment, that kind of atmosphere, and it leads to attacks on journalists, which we've seen by Trump supporters, but not just Trump supporters. And the overall atmosphere is one that is increasingly dangerous, and it's very disturbing.
do you think Facebook should regulate? I mean, I'm not a big fan of the word fake news, but after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, do you think Facebook should be regulated by national authorities or international organizations in the way fake news are spread, and the way people are targeted, especially during electoral campaigns? Do you think there should be regulations there, or do you think that the market of information will self-regulate?
Yeah, well, I think a complete free for all is not is of advantage to no one, really. I don't think it helps. But on the other hand, I'm extremely wary of anything that smacks of state control over messaging in the media. Um,
Of course.
there's two sorts of ways to look at it. If you're coming at it from the point of view of a democratic country that is being undermined by this spread of deliberate propaganda through social media, then your attitude is, well, we really need to do something to address that. And we have robust enough institutions generally around our democracy that we can manage to do this in some sort of way, perhaps that will address the problem. Unfortunately, most of the world doesn't live in a country like that, right? Most of the world lives in a country where the media are, if not absolutely dominated by the state, I mean, they're just completely owned and operated by the state. So it's incredibly difficult and worrying. It's difficult to make a one rule on this sort of thing that would apply in both of these vastly, vastly different situations, right? I mean, going and telling an authoritarian regime that it's okay, or sending the message to an authoritarian regime that it's okay to control and completely regulate messages on Facebook or something would be sending completely the wrong message, right? So I think it's an extremely difficult problem because you have these two vastly different situations and a whole bunch of countries in the middle that are kind of maybe going one way or another, but that could slip towards the wrong way of the wrong side of that spectrum if you make the regulations incorrect. I mean, ultimately, what I think these things will improve by independent monitoring mechanisms that are done by by NGOs and media monitors that can look at these things and do fact checking and explain these things. I think there's also room for media literacy. I mean, Sweden's doing this right now in the context of its campaign, explaining to people and what propaganda looks like, how to sort of have a little bit of a critical eye, how to maybe think twice about sharing something. All this social media stuff is very new. We've put the editorial power in the hands of absolutely every single person in the planet almost. And these are people who don't have training in journalism. These are people who don't have training in editorial judgment. These are people who generally don't have long experience in sort of a second sort of that second sense where you go, wait a minute, this sounds too good to be true. Well, I'm just going to check this out before I report it, right? And so basically we made 7 billion, or the social media companies made 7 billion inexperienced editors. So we have this kind of situation that we have now. But I do think as people understand that power and understand that responsibility they have, it gets better. Will it affect everybody? Will everybody be great editors and whatnot? No, of course not. I mean, even now, editors and journalists who are professionals, not all of them are completely up to scratch. But I do think with time, we make specific, deliberate efforts to improve media literacy and a little bit of healthy skepticism in the viewers who are also, as I say, editors and sharers of information.
Andrew, thank you very much for being with me and with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's fun.
Be replayed on this Facebook page, and I'm going to add as many references to the things we discussed so that people can follow up also with links to your organization, to your work, to the work of Human Rights Watch.
Great.
Andrew, thanks again. Regards from Strasbourg, actually.
Okay.
And hope to see you sooner in real life next time.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay.
Have a good
Thanks.
day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.